Hey, FFR listeners. If you love getting to listen in on our convos each week, consider helping us keep bringing our signature brand of feminist pop culture analysis to you by joining our Patreon community at patreon.com/femfreak. You can get early access, exclusive bonus episodes, participate in AMAs, join our friendly Discord server, and more. That's patreon.com/femfreak. See you there.
I think the film ultimately does show that no matter how many fur coats you're able to buy, no matter how many dudes you have in, your phone contact list, ultimately it's not a real power that is sustainable.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined today by two women you can routinely find wearing fur coats and smoking cigarettes on New York City rooftops, Carolyn Pettit.
Hello.
And Ebony Adams.
God damn, I love that image. Hey.
Yeah, are you cuddling? Who's cuddling
no,
who?
But
who has the jacket?
There's a very memorable, obviously not that memorable, but there's an image seen in this film that we're going to talk about today, Hustlers, where the two, leads have a conversation on a rooftop, and J-Lo is wearing this, I think it's a fur coat. It's definitely something. Yeah.
It's a fur coat.
Yeah.
And they're cuddly.
Awesome. As the oldest person on the crew, I hope that can be me and that y'all will come and I smoke. So someone will come up and find me on a fucking rooftop and crawl under my coat of love.
Yes.
Ebony, you're basically J-Lo.
Oh God, I have been saying this for years. Thank you.
Well, if you haven't guessed, in this week's episode, we're going to be talking about the new fact-based crime film, Hustlers, starring Jennifer Lopez and Constance Wu.
That is the best, two-word intro. Fact-based.
It's good.
I just wanted to toss, cool.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, I feel like we ruined our format. It's fine, because this is what we do here on Feminist Frequency Radio. We're keeping it, fresh and going. And you never know what's going to happen over here on these airwaves.
That's right. Our brand is always be prepared.
How is everyone doing this Sunday morning?
Whew, tired.
What? Were you partying all night?
No, I just, so transitioning from working from home to working in an office over the last couple of months, my old body and ossified neural networks having a hard time, baby.
Yeah, it sucks.
It's
I think
hard.
about that sometimes. I'm like, I don't know if I could be out of my house for a solid 9 to 10 hours at a time. I don't think I'm okay with that.
This is how ridiculous I am. One of my new coworkers had a birthday party, and she very graciously invited me because she's just wonderful. And I went. She gave me a thank you card the next day in which she said, "Ebony, I understand you don't leave the house that often." Someone legit gave me a thank you card for leaving my fucking house. That's the reputation I have. That's straight up ridiculous. So
oh my God,
it's good for me that I have a
incredible.
job outside the house now, because that's not good that people know that about me.
I love it. Oh God, you need to frame that shit.
I did. I was just like, come on.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
All right, Caro, you got some entertainment news for us?
I do. We're going to start with a very sad story about a young white male comedian named Shane.
Not gonna lie, you had me for a second.
Yeah, no, Shane Gillis, who, all comedians dream of getting their shot at being on Saturday Night Live, and Shane got it. He got the call from Lorne Michaels, the god of comedy, but then cancel culture reared its ugly head and found that Shane's idea of comedy apparently is sitting and just talking to another guy and just flat out being racist without even making jokes about it. And then Shane Gillis's shot at being on SNL, evaporated. The Shane Gillis saga has basically, the whole thing has occurred in the time since we last recorded an episode where we did entertainment news. But I just wanted to mention it because you had things happening around it, like Rob Schneider, right-leaning former SNL cast member himself. He of legendary characters such as making some copies and you like the juice, huh? The juice is good. Just brilliant Rob Schneider characters. Saying like, Shane Gillis, I'm so sorry that you are becoming a comedian in this intolerant era, and it's like, dude, I mean, look at Colin fucking Kaepernick. You want to talk about cancel culture? Let's talk about Colin Kaepernick, who has faced massive consequences for being anti-racist. Y'all are up in arms about a guy not getting a shot at SNL because he is straight up racist. Like, fuck off. No one is entitled to a job on Saturday Night Live.
What?
and this
read your contract, Anita.
Like,
no way.
I'm entitled to that shit. Why aren't I on SNL right now? Like, I can make jokes.
Interestingly, like Shane Gillis was announced as a new cast member alongside like the first ever like Asian cast member of the show, I think. But nobody's like, focusing on, man, think how white dominated like SNL has basically almost always been, and like how few people, who aren't white have even gotten the opportunity in the first place. But we have this attitude that there's this sense of entitlement for white folks. But how many Asian comedians have never even gotten a shot, in the first place, who would have been like deserving and no doubt much funnier and more clever and smart than Shane Gillis. But, we'll never know. We'll never know their names. We'll never know that they exist, most of them, because like they're not even in these conversations.
Shane Gillis said something to the effect of, I always try and push boundaries in my comedy and take risks. Hey, buddy. One of the risks is your jokes will be considered not funny and you'll have to suffer the consequences. But apparently, those are not the risks that he was talking about. Or indeed anyone, who, is uplifted unjustly by, white supremacy, patriarchy, misogyny, etc. Like, what? You mean to tell me I can't just disregard, anyone who is not a straight white man like me and still succeed? How dare you? How very dare you?
And also, it's bullshit in the first place that racist comedy is pushing boundaries, is challenging boundaries. It is reinforcing. It is like reinforcing the status quo. It is not, you want to push boundaries on stage, be an anti-racist comedian. Like, that's how you push boundaries.
Don't like resuscitate some tired ass, breakfast at Tiffany's Asian stereotype and be like, I'm cutting edge here, people. Anyway.
Another story, a more positive story. Sam Smith, who I have no idea who Sam Smith is. I'm just going to be honest. I don't know who Sam Smith is. Somebody who the kids are into, I guess, pretty popular. They announced, that they use they, them pronouns. And it was like, a huge deal on social media and everything. And it was, it was great. I imagine that things like that really do help to kind of mainstream the idea of non-binary folks and they, them pronouns. But it was interesting. Like, you definitely saw some interesting little fumbles and hiccups. For instance, I think it was NPR, had a tweet that went something like, Sam Smith announces that he uses they, them pronouns. And it's like, whoops, no, that's not how that works. That's not how that works. But I think a lot of us can understand the experience of having to make new adjustments in our lives as new ideas are introduced and things like, non-binary people were not a thing when I was growing up. They existed, of course, but they weren't like, we were not aware of, there wasn't this kind of, these kinds of conversations. Right. And anyway, so like, it's really just heartwarming and encouraging, I think, to see so much more happening or in the mainstream, in pop culture, as far as just awareness and acceptance of identities that exist outside of the gender binary.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
What a lovely positive, negative entertainment news structure.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about this fucking movie. In December of 2015, an article was published in New York Magazine that told an amazing story. In the wake of the 2008 Wall Street collapse, a group of women who worked at the New York strip club Scores saw the men and the money stop coming in. So they devised a risky, unconventional, and illegal way to make the money come in. Now, the true story of these women and their criminal endeavor is the subject of a new film called Hustlers, written and directed by Lorene Scafaria. The film stars Jennifer Lopez and Constance Wu and charts the spectacular rise and fall of a criminal enterprise that tells us a great deal about wealth and power in the early 21st century. Okay.
Well,
All right.
Well, let look. I like this movie. I liked it quite a bit, and I want to start by saying something about power in general, because I actually think the movie, taken on its own terms, is really good about power, and I think it goes out of its way to try to show again and again the realities of very limiting and oppressive like power structures. But I think that, I think some of the conversation around the film, I get a little uneasy at times, because there's a certain type of man who believes that women have power, and you'll hear men make this argument of like, well, women have power because they're sexy and men want that, and so women can be like manipulative and they have power that way. And it's like, that's not entirely always untrue in every situation. Like, there are situations in which women are able to use, I don't even want to say their sexuality, because it's not that, but the way that men desire them, they're able to use that to get certain things. But that is a kind of power that comes from being like viewed not as fully human. And,
I would argue that that's not actually power.
Well, I mean, it's, yeah, I mean, that's a fair argument. Gosh, what's the name of the writer who wrote like, We Should All Be Feminists? In We Should All Be Feminists.
Chimamanda Ngozi?
Yes. Like in We Should, and obviously like, I'm not endorsing everything that she's ever said. Of course, she said like some things about trans people that are not great, but like, she, there's a lot of value in a lot of her work as well. And like in We Should All Be Feminists, she talks at one point about what she calls bottom power, which is the kind of power that may come from that, but it's bottom power, and it is power that comes from being seen by men as desirable. And so some folks call this movie like empowering or maybe liberating, and I definitely understand that it can be satisfying in some ways to see women pull one over on these just unscrupulous, exploitative Wall Street guys. But let's remember, I guess I just want to say, let's remember that the kind of power that they are using, and it is like, I don't blame them for using it, like, and it is satisfying in some ways, but is a kind of power that reinforces or that plays off of the idea that women's value comes from being sexually desirable to men, and it relies on a sort of competitive hierarchy among women in which women who are more sexually desirable have more value and more power, and women who are less sexually desirable or attractive or what have you are less have less power and less value. And so ultimately, like, the goal, when people call this movie like empowering or liberating, like, I just think it's important to keep in mind that, well, ultimately liberation would look like this kind of power structure being obliterated altogether. But the reality is that it exists, and within that, of course, it's understandable and at times even good, perhaps that women would. Anyway, I just wanted to try to lay out some of my thoughts on power. I love
that framing.
Yeah.
I love that framing, Carol. So Anita and I saw this together a couple of weeks ago. I liked the film in a kind of mild way when I first saw it, but I have to admit, I'm liking it more and more as time goes on, and I've had a chance to let it kind of percolate through my brain, not because of the various things that I've been reading about it, but because, I've been able to, kind of untwist a little bit of my reactions. And I want to pick up a thread of what you were just talking about. The notion of whether the kind of power that a marginalized person, not just women, but a marginalized person can employ in certain moments. So whether that's, women leveraging the desire that, primarily cis men feel for them, or whether it's, Black people leveraging, cultural notions of cool that, white communities feel about, whatever, right? That ultimately it's a very limiting kind of power, but also it's one that you do not own. And it's one that can be taken back at any moment. And so I think it's very important that the film shows us that as effective and successful as these women are, at the end of the day, the literal power of the state is used against them to stop them from maintaining this power, right? Like ultimately they are brought down by the force of the law, and men, protecting other men from women, using this kind of power. Like I think the film ultimately does show that no matter how many fur coats you're able to buy, no matter how many dudes you have in, your phone contact list, ultimately it's not a real power that is sustainable,
Yeah.
and that's ultimately healthy for you to exercise.
To give the movie credit for like acknowledging the power structures that these women within which these women exist, like very early on, as Destiny or the Constance Wu character Dorothy / Destiny, like I think it's like her first night at Scores or like an early night at Scores, and basically like as she's leaving and she has her earnings, the money that she's made, she's like basically shaken down by a few different men, one or two different men who work at the management and maybe security, or I don't remember, but like where she has to give these men, a not insignificant cut of her earnings. And it's just this, like the film is not trying to fool us or obscure the fact that even within these systems, like men are probably the primary money makers. Like how much money must these men be raking in, if every woman, who passes through there, who's like dances, like has to cut her earnings and give them a chunk. So, and that is like a much larger, major issue with like sex work more broadly, is that like, I mean, who is really the primary profiters off of it, depending on how it's structured, and and so on and so forth. So I appreciated that the film like.
Well, I would argue that it doesn't really do that.
Okay,
and that's kind of the great transition. So I had the opposite reaction to Ebony. I think we both walked out of there being like, "Wow, that was a lot better than we thought it would be." I think we both thought it would be a little like bad.
Yeah.
And it's an enjoyable film to watch. But there was something that really bugged me about it, and I couldn't quite form it into specific words. Like I was using sort of superficial language to talk about it when we walked out of the theater. And I think that what I am troubled by is more so the review by A.O. Scott in the New York Times, I think, actually articulates a lot of my issues with it. So he says, but class struggle isn't really at stake any more than gender equality is. The spirit of Hustlers is so insistently affirmative and celebratory that all kinds of interesting matters are left unexplored. And I think that is part of my issue with this film, is that like, it's not that we're not, like, I think that it's great that there are moments that celebrate them as humans. Like, you see them enjoying time with their families. You see them as mothers. You see them as struggling. Like, like, it is a much more well-rounded, I suspect. I'm not suspect, but, historically, portrayals of sex workers have been really one-dimensional and shitty, right? So having them be centered and having them be, like, the fully developed humans to some degree, I think is important. But, I like that you opened this whole conversation about power, because like, I think this point is real. Like, it's not really, yeah, okay, these guys have a lot of money and they don't, and they're trying to get money, but like, there's not a ton of like systemic, it's still really like glossy and shiny. So I'm going to say something that is against all of my feminist beliefs and morals. When J-Lo comes out, J-Lo is 50, y'all. When she comes out and she looks fucking like, I'm going to say incredible, even though I don't want to like make I want to be very clear that like what we value as youth and beauty and all of that is a huge problem. But I don't care. Just for this moment, I'm going to say this. JLo comes out and she looks fucking amazing. And she's like dancing on stage and it's just incredible. And I've actually seen her live a few years ago doing something similar. And you're just mesmerized by her, right? Like she's an incredible performer. And I think that that's kind of the problem here, right? Like even someone with all of these like feminist values or my particular type of feminist values, I'm like, oh shit, this is amazing. Like she's amazing. Look at this amazing woman. That they're still showing off women's bodies. They're still sexualizing them in the same time that they're trying to show that these women are empowering themselves. So it feels very much like the girl boss. Like it feels like a celebration of that like girl boss trope. Like we're going to do our own thing and aren't we cool for doing our own thing?
You know, I didn't have that reaction to it. I do think the film is like legible to both kinds of audiences, you know, and both kinds of, or a multitude of readings, not just two kinds of readings. But I do think that the film does take more care to kind of offer a class critique than is perhaps it's being given credit for. I don't think it necessarily executes those class critiques incredibly well at all times in the movie, nor do I think it really engages with race in a way that I would have been super interested in, because the fact is most of the women, all of the main characters, like the main characters in this are women of color, and they are largely taking white men, you know, and the person who ultimately writes the story that leads to this movie, like in this, you know, super meta loop, is a white woman, right? And I don't think that enough time is really spent teasing that out, but I don't think that the film like shuts that down either or suggests that that doesn't matter. I do think that we do get glimpses of the notion that like, if you are of a certain class, if you are of a certain ethnic or racial category, then there are certain like systemic or structural changes in power that are simply unavailable to you. And so all you see and all you feel capable of doing is doing these sort of like individual moments of resistance. Again, I think the film is much more gracious to these women than we are traditionally, you know, expected to have films be. You know, as you point out, Anita, like sex workers of any form don't typically get any kind of, you know, human understanding in films. But I don't know. I think, like I say, as the longer I sit with this movie, the more I think like, you know, I believe this is Lorene Scafaria's debut film, the more I think like, you know what?
No. Sorry,
okay.
but it's just to be clear. No, it's
Sorry,
not.
but you're wrong.
Yeah, no, I don't. Yeah. I just don't want. Yeah, fact check, rewind, fact check. No, narrator says actually it wasn't. Yeah. But you know, whatever. But
we definitely need like a sound cue that's like Ebony's wrong. And so Rob, feel free to come up with that. But anyways, I just felt like, you know, it's a very promising film. You know,
yeah,
and yeah, there are things that I wish it were a little bit defter, you know. I think it rather than just sort of offering these, you know, items for thought or issues for thought, that it actually had a more sustained analysis. But as I say, like the longer I think about it, the more I think like, yeah, there's the beginnings of something here, of an argument.
I mean, I do think it's interesting to look at some of the critical discourse around the film, right? Because I do feel like from some male, you know, critics, there is, I would say, a bit of this kind of paternalistic or dismissive, this not giving the film that much weight, like, oh, you know, if this were a Scorsese film with like, and the criminals were men, like it would, you know, it would be just appraised differently. You know, it reminds me of how there's a certain set of music critics who didn't take Taylor Swift's album 1989 seriously until Ryan Adams re-recorded it song for song. And then it's like, oh, you know, but like this kind of, because it centers women and because it's about the kinds of power and the kinds of women that it's about, it's like, it's not given as much weight. Like there's a scene in the film that, where, so there's like a a sting operation happening, or or I don't remember who's recording the audio for what reason, to be honest. But like the way the scene plays out is that we see the events transpiring, but we're hearing the audio from the recording. So the audio is kind of like you just can tell that it's like playing off of a recording, and it's kind of like, I don't know, staticky, or just it has those kinds of issues. And it's like, oh, that's like, when that moment came, I'm like, oh, that's like something that Scorsese might do. Like, that's a very like, and maybe the film actually tries to like mimic Scorsese a little too closely, but I mean, but it has, I don't know. I just feel like, I just want to say that like there are a lot of valid reasons to critique this film, but if you're a dude who's just like not giving it as much weight because it centers women and etc., like that's fucked up. And that is definitely an issue that is happening around this film.
Yeah, I can't remember who posted the tweet where they were like, they screenshot a bunch of male critics saying like, I just wanted to learn more of the backstory of the men. I wanted to spit where, why don't the men, why aren't they three-dimensional?
Look.
It was like this series of screenshots. And it was just like such this incredible self-own, of dudes. Like they cannot sit for 2 hours in a film that centers women.
Look, I got no problem with the like ultimate morals of these women swindling these rich white dudes.
Right.
Like that was not a problem for me at all. One thing though that I think is interesting, not necessarily about the movie, but that comes up around this. So both in the film and in the article that inspired the film, the men who come forward, the very few men who tried to report to the police that this was happening weren't believed. And when those stories, there was a story of a doctor that like made it to, page 6 or whatever, was made fun of, like actively made fun of, that like men, like we talk a lot about like women who are victimized who aren't believed, but that there's an interesting dynamic happening here where like if men are victimized by women, it's so unbelievable and embarrassing that one wouldn't come forward, and that other men wouldn't believe you that was actually happening. Yeah,
I mean, there's a line in the film. The film, at least addresses this a bit, where I think one of the cops toward the end, or somebody says like, yeah, the men, just admitting like that they don't have much of a case against Ramona and Destiny and the rest of the women because men don't want to talk to the police. And at that moment, I thought like, wow, that's just so interesting. Like the reasons why a man wouldn't want to talk to the police and admit, are so different from the reasons why women wouldn't want to talk to the police. It's because I got the sense, at least in the film, that it was like, oh, because it would be like a bruise to their male ego to admit that they had been taken by a woman or a group of women that like...
Yeah, and apparently the men did call into the police, and it sort of became a joke, according to the article, right? Whatever credence you want to give that men did call in, and the police were getting, like, they were just like, this keeps happening, and then we see the story, and like, yeah, ha, like, yeah, right. And the only reason they took it seriously was because the man in the movie that we do see recorded the conversation where these are fictionalized versions of these characters, but the conversation with one of them about actually swindling him. And so that was the only reason that the cops would take it seriously and did something about it. But like, they probably could have gone on for so much longer. Like it clearly sounded like they were falling apart a little bit and getting a little more extreme and all of these other things. But like, it worked in these women's benefit that like nobody would believe these men, even if they did come, or even when they did come forward. And like, there's something so complicated about that, like you were getting at, Carolyn, around like the different reasons why that's happening. The different reasons why, like, men don't want to believe that, like, the reason that we don't believe women and non-binary folks when they come forward about abuse is very different than like, I don't believe that women are capable of doing that to you, or that you would fall victim to, these strippers or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's embarrassing for you. You should feel shame for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, ultimately, the notion of a kind of like this very puritanical understanding of, sex and what makes someone like a legitimate victim. And yeah, I mean the misogyny ultimately that it underscores all of this, which says that, if you are victimized by a woman, then the problem is with you. And you are an unworthy victim, because anyone who could be taken advantage of by a woman who is, by definition lesser, like it, I don't want to be this person, but I'll be this person. It all ultimately ties back to hatred of women. So there.
Yeah, I mean, the film ends with a line, Ramona, I think, saying like, this whole country is a strip club. You got people tossing the money and people doing the dance. And like, there's definitely truth to that. And I mean, it taken a certain way, interpreted a certain way. And, I guess I do wish the film were more, because I do think it's so possible for audiences to walk out of this film with that feeling of like satisfaction of like, yes, like those women like got those like Wall Street guys, like, that's good. And not like, but not taking that extra step of like, but why is Wall Street so completely male dominated? And why are these women like in this position in the first place? And like, yeah, I mean, I guess I do wish that it's that, I mean, while I do see a kind of clear-headed acknowledgement of structures of power in the film, personally, I do wish that it had gone a little further with a really like active in-your-face kind of critique. I mean, yeah. But like there's lots of little moments in this film that I think get at like how effed up just the entire system is. Like there's a point at which I think, I think right after the crash and like the women have mostly like stopped working at Scores and are trying to find, other kinds of jobs. And I think Destiny or Dorothy is working at like Old Navy for a bit, and she needs, and she has a young daughter. And she goes to ask her manager for like, can I be let go at such and such time on Fridays to go pick up my daughter or, whatever. And he's like, no, that's not my problem. Hey, look, more.
Isn't that Councilman Jam?
It's Ramona. Isn't that Ramona that is?
Oh, Ramona. You're right. Yeah, it's Ramona. But so.
What'd you say, Ebony?
I said, isn't that Councilman Jam or whatever his name is from Parks and Rec? But
anyway, my God.
But he goes on to say like, take more hours, get more money, babysitter or whatever. And it's like one of the big problems with American ideology writ large is like the work and the money are all that matters, and not like he doesn't even factor in like what if she wants to like spend time with her child, right? It's to him it's all about like well, make more money to pay the babysitter who then so you don't need to be with your child.
It does show kind of the hierarchies that exist between people in the working class too, because that dude's not making a lot of money, but because he has like a certain level of, of power, he's above her. He chooses to kind of like suppress her in a way that's like, dude, this working at Old Navy is not going to make anybody rich. It doesn't matter how many hours you work, it doesn't matter if you're in management, like none of y'all are getting paid enough to justify this. But, we do tend to eat our own.
Yeah. And I think that in the film, like every time it does something like that shows some of these power dynamics or shows the struggle, it also doesn't show other things, right? And not that the film needs to do everything, but like, I think that the fetishism of wealth in the movie in terms of the women being like, there was a line where Destiny was like, can you have sex with a car? Because I feel like this is whatever that with her Escalade, and like all of the money like that they're spending on like designer clothes and handbags and all of that stuff, like that they're making money to like live this really lavish life, not necessarily to like, it's like to take care of their families, but that's not really a big part of this, right? It's more like, well, you get to live lavishly. Why don't we get to do that as well? And like, there is literally no challenging or commentary or like, we're not meant to look down on them for like the sort of grotesque consumer culture that everyone is now participating in, right?
Sure. And I mean, that's a very, like, to go back to kind of my comparison with like Scorsese, like you look, if I think in his films, like probably, Goodfellas and Casino and stuff, and just like the kind of the crime film template in general, like of this particular type of crime story. Like you almost always have like the montages or the sequences where you see like the piles of money rolling in, and you see like you get that sense of like the highs, like the heights of their success to kind of, set us up for the fall that we know is coming. But yes, like you're absolutely right. It doesn't necessarily, or doesn't at all, kind of come with a layer of a critical lens baked into like, well, this was the whole point, just to like own, to buy like the fancy handbags and the really expensive cars and so on and so forth. Like, and I mean, like, yes, of course, like if the wall, like there's so much money out there, and there's the people, like the Wall Street people have it, not because they work harder or because they like have earned it in any kind of like moral or ethical sense at all. Like they are stealing it in a sense, right? It's complicated, right? Like the money is out there. It's completely fucked up that somebody working hourly at Old Navy makes as little money as they do, while CEOs are raking in, hundreds of millions or billions, and Wall Street people are getting bonuses, in the $500,000 or millions of dollars, etc. But like that doesn't mean that consumerism is inherently like good if you're like a good person or whatever. I don't know.
I think that this movie is trying really hard to be an enjoyable yet serious mainstream film, and I think that that's the problem. And this is just occurring to me now, so pardon my inability to articulate this clearly, but like it wants us to have the experience that I had, right? Watching it, where I'm like, oh, you like, there's ups and downs, and like you feel connected to them and you're excited for them, and then there's like cool music and Usher walks in and isn't that hilarious and funny, haha. Like there's all of these pieces of it that are like glamorous and fun and like things, and like you feel good watching it, with then is sprinkled through that, like what you're talking about is like the crash, right? The rise and fall of these women. And I think what I would want from a film like this is something a little more real, like something a little more, and maybe to them that is real because it was glitzy and glamorous until it wasn't. And then it was again until it wasn't. But I feel like we are asked to celebrate this in a way that ignores a lot of things, or doesn't really root itself into all of the stuff we're talking about, like deeply into the power dynamics, deeply into class and gender and race, even though it nods at it. And it just nods at it enough so that it's easy for us to not critique it and be like, wow, it was really deep, to someone who doesn't have like a super evolved analysis of power dynamics, right? Does that make sense? I don't know.
It does, although I don't want to leave on the notion that like the only way to truly enjoy this film is if you don't have an evolved I'm
not trying to say that, because I did enjoy it. Like I enjoyed watching, like I don't want to make it sound like, again, it's an enjoyable film. Right.
And like, J-Lo, and I mean, the actors are outstanding, right?
Yeah.
And like it's frustrating. It is frustrating that Jennifer Lopez doesn't, like, historically, except for a few rare exceptions, like isn't really taken seriously as an actor. And it's like this film, a lot of people are like, wow, she's so good, like Oscar buzz, etc. And like that's good. Like she should absolutely be like taken seriously as an actor.
I think she holds up this film.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like,
for me too.
The film without that casting would not at all we would be having a very different conversation now.
Yeah.
Yes.
I look forward to us talking about this even more in the bonus, because I have a couple more things I want to say. So people who get the bonus, pull up your big girl boots, because it's coming. I don't even know what that means. Sorry to all of our audience, all three of you.
All right. Let's take a quick break.
Hey, Feminist Frequency Radio listeners. We'd love to have you join our Patreon community. Hop on over to patreon.com/femfreak. Do it now!
What's your freak out?
All right, and we are back. Now it's time to talk about what's been thrilling us, moving us, upsetting us, or infuriating us this past week. Who would like to begin?
I'll go first. So there is a new podcast called Fun City, and it's a role-playing campaign podcast. So, like, if you haven't listened to one of these before, basically it's like you're listening to people play a role-playing game. Like, that's literally what you're doing. And there's a game. So the game being played, the tabletop role-playing game being played on Fun City is Shadowrun, which Shadowrun is a cyberpunk / fantasy role-playing game, right? It's a future world where there's massive evil corporations, and there's a matrix that people hack into to do all kinds of shit. But there's also like orcs and elves and mythical creatures and magic in the world. So. And so in this case, the game master is Mike Rugnetta, who some folks may be familiar with, and you're basically you're listening to a story play out as Mike kind of leads his crew, the players, through the campaign that he has designed, and so you have an assortment of different cast members, basically each playing a role within the game, and it just launched. There's only a few episodes out right now, but those few episodes do a really great job of setting up not only the characters in the party that we the listeners are going to be following, but also like it's just an intriguing premise for their future adventures. Basically, they get called by this successful but shadowy businessman or figure whose boat has been stolen, and he needs them to retrieve their boat. Shadowrunners, the characters in Shadowrun typically like operate outside the law. They move in the shadows to pull off jobs, for all kinds of people. And like, you just know that this job of like retrieving the boat is like not going to be nearly as simple as it initially appears. And then it's going to lead to all kinds of twists and turns and shocking revelations and so on and so forth. So, it's just a really fun listen. I'm fully on board, like even just after the first few episodes. The characters are really, vibrant and vivid in the campaign. Mike does a great job of bringing the world of the game to life. So, if you're looking for more podcasts to listen to, I recommend giving Fun City a shot.
Great. Ebony?
So I just started reading Come As You Are, The Surprising New Science That Will Transform Your Sex Life by Emily Nagoski, PhD. This is an author that I was not well acquainted with, but thanks to conversations with our very own Anita Sarkeesian, I discovered it, and I'm enjoying it a lot. I am increasingly fascinated with, well, I shouldn't say increasingly fascinated because this has always been the case, but I am delighted by the increasing prevalence of like mainstream works that tackle the notion of female sexuality and really try and unpack what it means to be physically intimate with someone, and walks people through like the way our fantasies are formed and how our bodies work. And I just think this is great. I think the more we just demystify this stuff, the better. I will say that the book does rest upon a pretty binary framework, and it is very cis-centric. So when the author and I've just gotten into it, so this may be, something that that the author addresses later in a more sustainable way. But for the most part, I have found that when she, talks about women, she is talking about cis women specifically. So that's just the caveat, that this book, while wonderful, is not as broad spectrum as perhaps many folks would like. But yeah, I love it. I love the notion that we can have these conversations about like, listen, there is no normal for human bodies, and there is no normal for, sexual response, the intensity of it, the lack of it, whatever, the more we can have these kinds of conversations and the earlier that we can have them so that, people don't moonwalk into adulthood completely unaware of these issues, the better. So anyways, Come As You Are, The Surprising New Science That Will Transform Your Sex Life by Emily Nagoski. Super good.
My freak out this week is a book by Emily Nagoski.
No way.
Yeah, it's funny because my freak out this week is a newer book by Emily and her sister Amelia called Burnout: The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. And what's interesting is that in Emily's book Come As You Are that Ebony just referenced, the portion of that book that a lot of people reached out to Emily about was the section about stress and burnout and how that affects your sex life. And so her and her sister ended up writing this whole book about burnout. And I learned about them because they did a talk at XOXO, which is an arts and tech festival in Portland. And I was crying through their whole talk. Like literally everything they said, I was like, stop talking about me. And then not only are they amazing public speakers, they're twins, they like bounce off of each other in these great ways. But at the very end of their talk, Amelia, who is a choral director, not director, what is it called when you direct music?
Conductor?
Conductor, thank you.
Yeah.
And so Amelia starts singing Moana, and then Emily's telling a story of hardship in between the singing of the Moana, and then I started bawling like uncontrollably. My friend sitting next to me just like wrapped her arm around me. It was like, it's gonna be okay. So I was like, cool, I guess I should read this book because clearly I'm having emotional reactions to it. I'm not that far into it, but I really like it a lot. It's not a lot of stuff that I don't already know, but it's like a reframing of some of it. And it's also, I think we at different points in our lives are ready to hear different things.
Yeah.
There are things that you may have heard many times before, but at some point you're ready to hear it. So some of the stuff in the book that I really like is one, it just gets right into it. It's not a ton of preamble. It gives you very practical ways of thinking about things to get started. And the thing that I'm really interested in is the difference between stress and a stressor. And so you can deal with the stress that your body takes in by doing certain activities and fitness and all that kind of stuff and cycling that stress out, which is completely different than like your boss is a dick every day, right? And so you deal with those things separately and how to deal with all of that. And I love it. So Burnout: The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle.
Awesome.
Yeah. You can submit your own freak out at feministfrequency.com/freakout. That's FREQOUT.
Wow.
Thank you so much for listening to Feminist Frequency Radio. Stay tuned for the Freakin' After Party, only available to backers of this podcast. You can learn more at patreon.com/femfreak. You can find us everywhere great podcasts are found. If you haven't yet, go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review us. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and all the social medias at FemFreak. The show is engineered by Rob Pera. Sarah Norellis provides technical support, artwork by Jamie Varon, and our intro music is by Phil Circus. Join us next week for another feminist dive into popular culture. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Later.